I was thinking about guidebooks. Save the bees, save the bees. This is another one that's not very spoon feedy. You kind of have to use your brain a little bit. This is all text, baby. This is all text. I'm also learning something from this deck, which I always think is fun. I don't know my angels. Going out of print, run, don't walk. So what I've actually done is define a bad guidebook. I don't know, discuss in the comments. Hello everybody, it's Sylvie. Welcome or welcome back to Tarot Magpie. I hope you're doing all kinds of good. We're chatting guidebooks today. I don't know what originally started me thinking about guidebooks, but I was thinking about guidebooks and I thought I would do a video kind of going through some of my favorite tarot guidebooks. So I've kind of loosely organized it into guidebooks that are big and chunky and really in-depth, guidebooks that are more like little white books but are really good little white books. I've got a couple honorable mentions of decks that have guidebooks that you have to purchase separately, but everything else is a guidebook that comes with the deck. And then finally, I also have a couple of additional honorable mentions that you can actually see here. So, you know, no spoilers, but these are decks that I haven't really had that much of a chance to work with yet, but I'm excited to dig into, and I think the guidebooks are going to be really good. I suppose, first of all, I should clarify what I think makes a good guidebook. And for me, a good guidebook is one where you do not need to reach for an external tarot book, something like 78 Degrees of Wisdom or Radical Tarot. You know, I can just use the book that comes with the tarot deck. Obviously, I have been practicing tarot for long enough now that I have my own kind of in-brain meanings for the tarot cards. But I think a good guidebook is not just about the tarot card meaning, it should also reference the artwork of the deck that we're looking at, which is going to be a big theme in the guidebooks I pull out, because so many decks are beautiful, really cool, interesting artwork, but then the guidebook does not at all reference what we're seeing in the card. And at that point, I think, well, I might as well just reach for 78 Degrees of Wisdom or, you know, Finding the Fool or whatever, because if the guidebook does not reference the specific card that I'm looking at, this specific artist's rendition of the Eight of Swords, why reach for that guidebook in the first place? I might as well go for like a tried and true one that I know really aligns with the tarot system in the way that my brain thinks about it. So I suppose what I've actually done is define a bad guidebook, but a good guidebook, in my opinion, references the specific artwork we're looking at. If the deck has a theme, which a lot of these do, if it's got a particular theme or it's got a particular angle that it's taking, I want that to be discussed as a facet of the, I guess, more traditional meaning of the particular card. I hope that makes sense, and I hope it will make more sense as I go through. All right, I think I'm going to start with the good little white books, as I'm calling them. And these are in no particular order, it's just the order I've stacked them up on my desk. But I have here Midnight Magic, which was a mass market deck that came out last year. And I really, really like this. So this is a mushroom deck. I'll do a quick flip through of the cards. So as you can see, each card in this tarot deck is depicted with a particular mushroom, and on the card itself we've got the, I guess, colloquial name. So this is purple Lacharia, I don't know, and then the Latin name, and then the card. So this is the Knight of Cups. I really like this deck for the artwork. I think it does a really good job of depicting the energies of the card with something as inanimate and non-human as a mushroom. It's got some little decorative flares. It's a really good deck. I used this, I think this was my monthly pull for a hot minute back in last year before I transitioned over to my current journal system, so I can't show you. But anyhow, this is the guidebook that comes with it. And like I say, I spent a month reading these entries. And let's start with the majors. What I like about this guidebook is it discusses the mushroom that's been chosen and how that ties in to how the creator thinks about the tarot cards. So here we've got the Magician, which is here the little bird of the woods, and it talks about how it's used in divinatory ceremonies by the indigenous tribes in Mexico. In native Aztec language, they're known as the divine mushroom that describes or paints. So it's psychoactive, and it's tying that divination in with the Magician's Call for transformation and action. So right off the bat, we're talking about what's actually in the card. I'm also learning something from this deck, which I always think is fun. And then upright and reverse, we've got keywords, and we've got a little message which also links in with the mushroom itself. And if not this specific mushroom, it references fungal ecosystems, it references how mushrooms grow. Like, it very much is, it's a mushroom deck. It's not just mushroom artwork for some generic tarot card meanings. And I hope that that is clear. Sorry, I just got distracted by Corpse Finder, which I think is such a metal name. Reported to have brought a crime to light when they gathered over buried human remains for judgment, which I love because judgment with the like resurrection, oh, it's so good. So here we've got like the science, the release of nitrogen from a decaying mammal is what causes it to appear. It's a mushroom fact. We've got upright meanings, reverse meanings. The fruits of your labors will appear when the time is right, just as the mushroom is the fruiting body of the fungus. I just think it's really cool. I fear there's going to be a lot of repetition in this video, so I will try and keep it relatively quick. No promises. I think you could also take a lot of these decks as maybe a bit of a recommendation for maybe a first tarot deck if you want something that isn't just the Rider-Waite-Smith, because I think these all do a good job of depicting the 78 tarot cards, but within the theme or the concept of their deck, especially these that are like good little white books, because all you need to do is buy the deck and it's quite compact, relatively speaking. The Lifelines Tarot Color Outside the Lines edition, this is out of print, I'm afraid, so you can't actually get this copy, at least not new. I'm sure it's available on, you know, eBay. So I've shown this off a million and one times, so I'll keep it brief, but it's a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. It is a rendition of the line work with that like single line drawing. So it's not the complete line work. There's a lot of negative space. And then this edition also has some color added in. And I think this is it's a really easy reader for me. But the reason I love this guidebook so much is actually mostly down to the majors, which come with, got our keywords, got our description, and it's very Rider-Waite-Smith consistent because it is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. The majors also have these oracle guidance questions, which you can use in so many ways. I love when a guidebook has questions involved, and that's a feature of quite a few of these actually. You can use them as journaling questions, you can use them as prompts to pull more tarot cards. It's also got an affirmation for the major arcana. I will admit I will admit that the minor arcana, less in depth, less good. This is maybe less of a beginner friendly deck if you're like a total beginner, because all we've got is a couple keywords and then the astrological association. So like Mercury in Aquarius, Moon in Aquarius. The minors, less in depth. The other reason I like this guidebook is I really like the spreads and tips for reading that are included in the beginning of this guidebook. Narrative 3-card spread, like there's actually lots of spreads, and then there's this working with your inner child with a couple of different spreads and exercises. I really like when a tarot guidebook includes more than the token 3-card and Celtic cross spread. I like when a guidebook includes ways that you can actually use the tarot deck, because I think especially new tarot readers, but I'm sure all of us will want to pull cards, but then we feel a little bit stumped of like, how do I use this deck, especially if it's a new deck, is what I find personally when I bring a new deck into my collection. Sometimes it kind of sits there and I'm like, I'm not really sure how to talk to it. So I like when a guidebook comes with ways to use the deck, because it helps me feel more connected to the deck, because it is what the creator intended, not just for the tarot as a whole, but for this specific deck. So like I've done this inner child, especially the Market of Memory spread really sticks in my brain. I mentioned that in a video. If I remember, I'll link it. So it's very user-friendly. It's a really solid little white book. I wish the minor arcana were a little bit more in depth, but to be fair, a lot of people do view the minor arcana as very minor. You've got the big energies in the majors and the kind of more everyday stuff in the minors. So that is the Lifelines Tarot, Color Outside the Lines. Okay, next up, This is the Lilith Tarot. This is the gold edition. This is another deck that I talk about all the time. I really enjoy it. I think it's really beautiful. You know, it's gorgeous. But the guidebook, again, it's a very little white book, kind of. Should we maybe be zoomed in slightly more than we have been? So the reason, okay, first of all, the font is teeny tiny. So reading glasses potentially necessary for this guidebook if you struggle with small font. But the reason that I really love this guidebook and the reason it stands out to me is because of all this at the beginning. We've got symbols, the 4 elements, how that breaks down. Air represents the analytical self. We've got virtues, vices, symbols, and colors. Elemental dignities and balanced and in excess. We've got the zodiac with the planet, the element, gifts, body, herbs, and stones for each of the 12 zodiac signs. And then planetary symbols, which are on the cards as well, because this is a good deck to use if you are wanting to do some, I guess, decan work, or if you are just wanting to incorporate the astrological correspondences into your tarot. Maybe if you're a Thoth reader, this would be a good deck to use that also incorporates all of that. We've got feminine and masculine, sacred colors, sacred numbers, some numerology stuff. It's sacred symbols. It's really cool, and you can totally use this as a crib sheet for interpreting the cards just with these like correspondence tables, which I don't know if I've come across this in a guidebook before, at least not in such a small guidebook, but I really enjoy just being able to kind of pull it keywords here and there. I just think it's really cool. We've got a couple of spreads, which are again unique to this deck. And then we get into the guidebook meanings and the major arcana. It's keywords upright and reversed. Affirmations for the majors, which I don't tend to use affirmations personally. I'm not a look into the mirror and speak an affirmation kind of a person, but I really like them to just get another perspective on the energy of each card. So I like when there's affirmations included in a guidebook because, again, it just tells me something about the card. It tells me something about the creator's intention for the card. Again, for the minor arcana, it's slightly less information. We have upright and reversed meanings. It's all keywords. So if you're a keyword person, you'll probably really like this. But I do have definitely a few decks that are much more in depth. But as little white books go, this is one of my absolute favorites. And I think it's a really solid guidebook for this deck in particular, with all the symbology and all the color associations. And like I say, I really enjoy when a guidebook speaks to the particular artwork of the deck that it accompanies, because if it's too generic, then it feels disconnected. It doesn't really help me read with that deck in particular. So this one I really like. Okay, the influence of the Angels Tarot. This one, I will admit, I've not actually read with this deck too much. I'm kind of in two minds about what I'm going to do with it. But very briefly, this has come out in a new edition that doesn't have this awful gloss finish. And I am kind of tempted to get it and see if I like the deck more, but that feels like a potentially expensive way to realize that I don't like the deck. Regardless, this is a composite collage of existing artworks. I don't remember off the top of my head what time period these are all from, or if it is that specific. So that's the visuals of the deck. And the major arcana, let's see if we can find one. Okay, the major arcana all are supposed to depict a particular angel. I don't know my angels, so it is somewhat meaningless to me, but that information is in the guidebook, as we'll see. But if you are into your angels, then maybe you would enjoy that. And then the court cards each are portraits of a specific person who have been chosen to depict the energies of that card. So there's quite a lot of intention behind the choices that were made with the collage. I really love the Three of Cups. So there we have it. You can see there's still a lot of the traditional symbols in the collage, like this Queen of Wands, got a sunflower, got her cat. But the guidebook, this is one that really speaks to the artwork of the deck. And for instance, here in the major arcana, you can see we're looking at the specific angel that is depicted in each of the majors symbols. And when it says symbols, it truly does mean which elements were included in the artwork. So in the wheel, it's got the 4 angels, which is how Domiel is pictured in this deck, representing the 4 winds. It's got the wheel, and it ties in with the tarot meanings, but it does specifically speak to what's been included in the artwork, which is pretty Rider-Waite-Smith consistent, but it's very literal symbols, if that makes sense. So we've got what's in the artwork, what the specific elements of the artwork represent in the energies and the meanings of the cards, direct meanings, and shadow meanings. So I guess you could take that as upright and reversed if that's how you read. And then there's also an angelic message, which is basically an affirmation. And if I remember correctly, that does follow through to the minors as well. Yeah, so here we've got the 8 of Swords. There's also a note on the numerology about what the 8s represent. And then we've got the symbols of the 8 of Swords. So the daggers, the blindfold, the lyre in this deck, the setting, direct and shadow meanings, and then an angelic message for the 8 of Swords. May your blindfold be lifted so that you can see, act with courage, have faith that the truth will set you free. Oh, do they all rhyme? How twee. No. The gifts that life offers are yours to enjoy when you're ready to take them in. Okay, that's acceptable to me. Anyhow, and then since we're here, so the quartz, again, pages embody youth and potential, like a generic, this is what pages are, and then Diderot was chosen to represent the Page of Swords in this deck. So I presume of the Enlightenment. The court cards depict real historical figures chosen to exemplify the particular meaning of the card. The angels on the court cards function the same as the angels on the pip cards, and the angels are blessing or witnessing the scene. So although I'm less familiar with this deck than the others and less familiar with this guidebook, I think this is just a very cool way to interpret the tarot, and especially because the court cards are tricky, I think, for almost everybody, and in most decks, the court cards are tricky. Do you interpret them as a very literal person? Do you interpret them as an energy? What if the literal person doesn't make sense in the situation you're reading for? Do you read it as a facet of yourself? All that jazz. They can be tricky, and so I think choosing a historical figure and highlighting, including why that person represents the King of Pentacles in this example, it's quite a unique way from what I've seen from most decks. I know there's a lot of decks that include real people as all the tarot energies, but I quite like that it's only for the courts, because I think that is an interesting take on the courts as literal people way of reading the tarot that I know a lot of people do. So again, I like it. It's detailed. It references the specific artwork and the elements on the cards you're actually looking at. You get keywords, you get upright, you get reversed. Just in general, the practice of picking out particular symbols in the card, and I know that for almost every tarot deck out there, there's like 100 symbols you could choose to pull out from it in any given card, any given reading. But I think this is potentially quite a good beginner guidebook because it gets you into the practice of looking at specific symbols and seeing what they mean. And then you maybe remember, like, presumably we talk about the sunflower in this card, and in the Queen of Wands there's often a sunflower. But even if you're reading with a deck that doesn't have a sunflower in the Queen of Wands, you kind of have that in your mind as a specific detail of the Queen of Wands. So yeah, I hope that made sense. I feel like I lost my own train of thought at the end there. I think it's really good. I really like the way this guidebook has been done. Like I say, I've not read with this deck a whole ton. I will figure that out for myself, but I do think the guidebook is really solid. All right, this is less of a little white book. This is more of like a medium white book, but this is the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. This is the mass market that came out from US Games. Obligatory flip through the cards because this is a truly beautiful deck. Visually, the artwork is gorgeous. The texture of the cards is gorgeous. It's got this gilding. It's got these beautiful backs. It's a beautiful deck. It's a lovely tactile experience with stunning artwork. The book is also pretty luxe. It's this little hardcover. It's really nice. But this I think of as a It's essentially a little white book. It's just a hardbound little white book. As you can see, for each of the cards, we get a little thumbnail and then we get the artist's interpretation of the card. And the reason I really like this deck is because it's not just the Hierophant means this, the Hierophant means that. It's this is a card I really struggled with. It's actually talking about his experiences with the tarot deck, his experiences with illustrating the cards, and where he struggled, where he decided to make changes, where he has personal associations. Like here, the Hermit is one of my 2 birth cards and one I feel closely connected to. So it's a very personalized little white book. When I'm reading with this guidebook, it helps me feel more kind of connected and more in tune with the deck because I'm getting the artist's intentions and thoughts behind each of the cards. I like getting glimpses into the artistic process. It's the same for the minors. We've got the same kind of amount of text for each. And I think this works really well for me. There's a complete lack of keywords, and it is very much like you do actually have to read the guidebook message. So it's less of a quick and easy grab and go kind of reader. But I think it helps you to really understand the cards in a slightly different way. As for the rest of the guidebook, I think there's a couple of, we've got a Celtic cross, which is a classic. We've got a relationship spread, identity and possibilities. It's much more an examination of the artwork or an explanation of the artwork than a here's how to read tarot book. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So this is kind of it's a medium white book because it is a little bit more in depth. And when I think little white book, I think keywords and generic card meanings. And this isn't that, but it's also not how to use this deck, how to read tarot, how to understand the system. So it's kind of sitting somewhere in between. And with that, we move on to the decks that I do not conceive of as little white books. First of all, the Goddess of Love Tarot, which I talk about all the frickin' time. I started stitching and decorating this bag in a video, in one of my tag videos, I don't know. But this is another collage deck. It is by the concept and the guidebook by Gabriella Herstick, and then the artwork is by Julia Popescu, who is Snakes for Hair on Instagram. I love a collage deck. I love pink. I love a girly, like a traditionally girly femme pink, diamonds, roses aesthetic. I think it's absolutely stunning. All of the pearls and the cups. This is a beautiful deck. Butterflies. I rave about this. I rave about this all the time. You know that I love this deck. So that is the deck. And then I also speak about this guidebook a lot. I think I talked about this recently in my mid-year tarot tag as my favorite deck I've used so far this year, or the deck that I've used the most so far this year, because I've been having a real moment with this over the last couple of months. But I will get into it again. You can see I've been highlighting and really, really getting into this deck in this guidebook. So this is the Goddess of Love Tarot, a book and deck for embodying the erotic divine feminine. And this is one of those decks that I was talking about that is heavily thematic. It's got a really strong concept behind it. So this is not going to be for everybody because it is a very specific perspective on the 78 tarot cards, and you may, and I may, and we all may disagree with some of the interpretations of the tarot cards because it's through this particular lens. But I do think it's been done really well. And even if I disagree with the meaning of a card as outlined in here, or I think it doesn't make sense to me, it's still really well done. And I appreciate it for that. And I also really love this deck. So there's a lot of front matter in this book, which I really like. So this is what kind of elevates it beyond a little white book, is what she means by love and sex magic and divine feminine and the goddess. So it gets into that. It gets into how to use this deck. There are some spreads, there's a blessing, there's some rituals, and then we get into the cards. So each of the major arcana has let me see if I can find one that's been renamed. Yeah, so here, the title at the top is the traditional title, so the Emperor, key 4, and then what it's been renamed to in this deck. Then for each of the major arcana, they've been associated with a different goddess from various different cultures and traditions. So here it's Vesta, and the astrological correspondence, which, as far as I can tell, are the quote unquote traditional astrologic correspondences for the tarot, which the Emperor is Aries. And then the major arcana has a description of the goddess and why that goddess has been chosen to represent the energies of each of the cards, an affirmation, a journal question, and a ritual. Only the major arcana have rituals. I have not done any of these rituals, I don't think, but I think, again, even if I'm not going to do them, reading the ritual is it's a really cool and quite a unique way to conceptualize the card. Again, even if I were to disagree with this ritual as being symbolic for the energies of the Emperor, it's really interesting to just think it through and kind of connect those dots. Because, as with everything, you can take it or you can leave it. I can see a thought process, I can understand a thought process and disagree with it for my own personal practice, but it still helps kind of flesh out my understanding of each of the cards and of the tarot system as a whole. When we get over here to the minors, it's a little bit of a shorter guidebook entry, but we've still got an affirmation and a journal question. And I think in the minors, because they're not associated with a specific goddess, it's a little bit more about what does this card traditionally mean. You can see I've been highlighting things that I think are interesting. And yeah, I really like this. I think it's a really solid guidebook. Like I say, not everyone is going to agree with it because it's, not everything is for everyone. Nothing is for everyone. So if you like Gabriella Herstig's work, if you like this take on a empowering love and sex magic themed tarot, I reckon you really get on with this because it is really well done. It's really well thought out, in my opinion, and it's one that's not spoon-feedy. And so I don't know that this was necessarily be the ideal beginner deck. It's not one that I would recommend as a first tarot deck just off the bat because it is quite a specific take. It's a very specific perspective on the cards. And if you don't have a basis or a generic guidebook, or if this is all you know about the tarot, I think that reading with anything else is possibly going to be a bit confusing. So that's what I mean when I say it's not spoon-feedy. I'm not trying to be dismissive of any other tarot deck or any kind of keyword based guidebook, but this is its own take on the tarot. It's not also trying to give you the traditional tarot meanings. I hope that makes sense. So that is the Goddess of Love. All right, the Bonefire Tarot by Gabby Angus West. This is the second edition that came out last year. I've got a walk through first impressions on the channel. Again, I love these edges. This is a fun, chaotic, colourful take on the tarot. It's fairly Rider-Waite-Smith consistent in a lot of the imagery and in the guidebook, honestly. I still kind of want the first edition that has the black borders because this is a little bit much when you're doing a reading, But anyhow, Gabby Angus West has several decks out, and yeah, this is a popular one. So I will leave that there. But onto the guidebook. First of all, it's so chunky. I love it. I love seeing a big fat guidebook. And this has a lot of front matter about the artist and the process and what prompted her to create this. And then as for the cards, I think everything is, the majors and the minors are pretty equal. They have equal real estate in the deck. It's got a little thumbnail picture, which is nice. And the top bit here is kind of generic, like little keywords and meanings. 8 of Wands, message conveyed with speed, hasty decisions, many opportunities and offers for your creativity. Like they're pretty standard tarot meanings. And then Bonefire says is very much the creator discussing what the card means to her, why she chose to illustrate it the way she did, maybe like difficulties she had illustrating it. It's quite similar to the Fyodor Pavlov in the way that it approaches the tarot. It's very much the artist discussing their vision and how they decided to portray the energies of each card. What I think makes this book more in-depth, more like meaty is this symbols section for each card. So in the there's a lot of repeating, as with almost any tarot deck, there's a lot of repeating imagery, there's a lot of repeating symbols. And on the entry for each of the cards, like here, this is the 10 of Cups. So here we go. 10 of Cups, one of my favorite artworks, by the way, I think it's beautiful. Symbols on the 10 of Cups, we've got the clover, the mountain, the rainbow, the river, and the tea. And then at the back, there is this glossary of symbols, so you can kind of cross-reference it. So if we look for clover, I could do with a little bit of luck, you lucky thing, superstition. It's kind of what that symbol can represent. So it's a little bit less in depth than the influence of the angels, because that went in depth to a couple of symbols for the energies of that particular card. But this is kind of broader, where the influence of the angels is deeper, because it's got multiple symbols for each of the cards, and then it also helps you kind of cross-reference that. I could pull a couple of cards and notice that they both got the same symbol, come and look that symbol up, and then use that to kind of bridge the cards a little bit, which is just very much how I think about the tarot. My tarot database that I've got on my computer of all my like meanings and notes and things is that kind of web interconnected graph format. So this just really floats my boat. It tickles my brain in a really good way. I like this kind of cross-referencing the tarot approach to things. And similar to the Fyodor Pavlov, I really enjoy having the artist's take on the tarot, which again, your mileage may vary, because I have what I would consider to be a really solid understanding of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I can take this artist's take and just take what resonates, leave what doesn't. You know, I'm not taking this as gospel, and I don't think you should take anyone's anything as gospel when it comes to tarot. It's a whole bunch of symbols in a deck of cards. Like, we made it all up. Make it work for you. But I can read this, I can say, oh, that's interesting, and maybe I don't necessarily agree, but it still helps me understand the energy of this particular artwork, because I'm kind of contrasting this with what I already know and understand about the King of Coins. So I really like this. I think this is it's a really fun deck anyway. It's really vibrant, it's really bright, and it's got a lot of personality in it, which is really reflected in that guidebook. Okay. The Herb Crafter's Tarot. This is another one that is really heavily themed. I feel like I spoke about this recently, but I don't remember when or why. So that's fun. But this is, like I say, it's a herby tarot. There's no people, it's plants. You get some hands in the court cards, which obviously now are not showing up anywhere. There we go. Get some hands in the court cards. But it's plants and it's plant energies, and I don't know a lot about plants. So this is a really interesting one for me, because it's very much out of my usual wheelhouse. And when I first started trying to use this deck, I felt really stumped, and then I was like, no, I just have to approach it as its own thing. Read the guidebook, which sounds so obvious, but like, yeah, read the bloody guidebook. And then I completely fell in love. So there is some front matter, there are some correspondences for like the numerology. So each of the plants in this deck, for instance, all of the 4s are plants used for borders and hedges, and all of the 7s are ancient trees. And then also there are some slightly altered suit meanings that make more sense with the concept of this deck. So air cards show tall sword-like plants outside, observing the plants as they are. The suit of earth features plants that are used to make legacy tools. Earth cards show baskets and fiber arts. So it's almost like putting the element in action through the setting that is portrayed in the cards. And then getting into the major arcana and also the minor arcana, they've each got a page. We've got some like kind of key messages and key meanings that I think are more generic. So the Hierophant, a revelation is at hand, seek the truth in spiritual teachings, the most potent wisdom emerges from the heart. You could apply like these to most tarot decks. They're pretty generic meanings. The text describes what's happening in the card, which I really like, because when I'm presented with this that is so unlike a traditional 10 of Cups, I'm kind of like, okay, what am I looking at? Like, I know I'm looking at some tea and some plants, but I like having this to kind of break it down for me. Like if we go to the 10 of water, serenity rises from the roots of gratitude, compost breeds contentment. Like I love the messages and I think they are pretty generic, but again, it's not very spoon feedy. Like fresh red clover blossoms dry on a sunny windowsill. A well-loved rainbow mug holds the steaming green tea as bees visit the purple field beyond the window. The descriptions are absolutely lovely. The writing is beautiful. And then for the kind of second paragraph, it is again talking about the plant itself, the energy that it's trying to evoke here. And then this is another one that's not very spoon feedy. You kind of have to use your brain a little bit to translate this to, if you're using this in like a traditional, like say like past, present, future, to translate that into tarot meanings. This again, this is not one that's like flashcards and then you come across something like this and that's so not how it's laid out that it can be a little bit tricky to kind of get your head around, which I think is great and I think is really valuable. But instead it's describing the energy and the feelings of what it's trying to portray. It's describing why this plant was chosen. Like red clover needs to be planted only once to flourish on its own. Trust your wishes to unfold without interference. So it's got some divinatory meanings, but it's not at all trying to like translate them directly to more traditional tarot card meanings, I guess. And then we also have these suggestions, so like crafting with each of the cards. And these are suggestions for how to, I guess, interact with the energy of the card or the plant in particular in a tangible, material, real life kind of way. Like sit on the earth and taste the nectar of red clover flowers, one petal at a time. Dance barefoot with gratitude. Enjoy red clover infusion. Like it's, some of them more than others are talking about the specific plant that's pictured, and then some of them are like a little bit more interacting with the energy of the card than the specific. Here we go. Pause to watch bees pollinating flowers and reflect on the magic of desire in your journal for the lovers. I really love this deck, similar to the Goddess of Love in the sense that it's a very specific take, it's a very specific theme, and it is using the structure of the tarot to give you ways to interact with that energy and that theme in a material, real life way. Like the Goddess of Love had the ritual, this has the crafting with. Save the bees, save the bees. It's kind of interactive and it brings the meanings of the tarot into a tangible real life something. It makes the tarot more tangible, even if you're not doing these activities, which I think some of them, I want to actually do more of this stuff. And the same with the Goddess of Love. Like I've not done any of the rituals. I want to, but even just thinking about doing these different activities helps kind of conceptualize the tarot in a different way. And I really appreciate that. I think it's a really, really good guidebook. Okay, finally, I've got a couple of those Llewellyn big box decks, which are very hit and miss for me. Some of them are glorified little white books, and it annoys me that the box is so big, but some of them are good. And I've got a couple here. So first of all, the Darkwood Tarot. And this book is by Sasha Graham, which possibly is why I think it's so good. So the reason that I like this guidebook is because, first of all, it discusses what's going on in the artwork, which what is the point in having this glorious full color glossy artwork book if you're not going to reference what's happening in the images? So it does talk about what's happening in the artwork. It connects the meaning here to the image that you're pulling when you pull cards. And we've got kind of generic Empress meanings, and then meaning keywords and reversed keywords. And then also, I also just like in the majors, we've got these archetypes and what the archetype of the High Priestess is. And then in all of the cards, it's like these little messages. So High Priestess is the archetype of the authentic self. You are the divine whisper of the universe. We're talking about the card. We've got some upright and reversed meanings, silent secrets, self-indulgent and self-centered. And then in the minors, we've got no archetypes, but we've still got these kind of like messages or keywords or key phrases. And there is still artwork for all of them. There's a little bit less text for the minors, which, like I say, is pretty standard. I'm getting distracted by this Seven of Cups because it's telling you what's in each of the cups and which of the major cards it connects to, which I think is cool. The Seven of Cups, my god, the Seven of Cups always has the potential to be like one of the coolest cards in the deck and have this kind of interconnected, again, we're like cross-referencing the tarot. So many decks do the Seven of Cups dirty. This one is good. I love that she's looking at the bats. Anyway, the minors still have these like key phrase and there's a little bit less text, but it's not skimping in a way that it totally could be. And a lot of Llewellyn decks do, in my opinion. What have we got here? We've got an epilogue. I think there are some spreads and there is some front matter that is, what is the point of this deck? Why did this deck, like what's different about this deck? Reversals, creating a book of shadows, alchemical questions. There we go, tarot spreads. Like there's a lot of front matter in this one that is how to read with this deck, how to actually use this deck. And I do also like that there are these like grimoire suggestions in here as well. Like I'm probably not going to utilize those personally, but it does make me feel that there was a concept behind this deck. It wasn't just, let's make a pretty deck, although this is a very pretty deck. That is the Darkwood Tarot. And then it had to be the Tarot of Vampires. Who guessed this was coming? This is definitely one of the decks that prompted me to make this video, was the Tarot of Vampires, which this one doesn't have illustrations. So we've all seen this before. This is going out of print, by the way. So get yourself a copy now if you have been wanting it. And the guidebook's really good. I honestly think it's worth getting for the guidebook alone. If it even vaguely appeals to you, I think it's worth getting, especially if you're more of a thothy astrological, or if you read with like the Kabbalah in mind. I think this is quite possibly a deck for you. This is all text, baby. This is all text. I couldn't be happier about it. So where do I even begin with this book? I just think it's really bloody good. I have not read this guidebook cover to cover. I have not worked extensively with this deck. I have read with it. I've taken a pencil to it. I've not done the full like highlighting and taking notes deck study yet. So there is a lot I have to learn from this deck still. And thus I'm not really sure how to get into this. Okay, so the actual descriptions of the cards doesn't start until like page 60 something. There's a lot of zodiacal correspondences. There's a lot of Kabbalistic correspondences. I am always learning more about astrology. I am always looking for ways to incorporate astrology and like the decan associations, planetary associations, etc. I'm always looking to incorporate that more into my readings. The Kabbalah, not so much, because I kind of feel like it's not my place, at least at this time. You know, I'm not Jewish. I don't have the cultural context for the Kabbalah, so it feels, it's the same with like chakras. I'm like, I've seen conflicting things about whether it's closed practices or not, but it's outside of my cultural context, so it's not something that I really consider when I'm reading the cards. That's just my little disclaimer that I don't know how good or correct or appropriate the Kabbalah information in this book is. All that being said, there's a lot of front matter. There's a lot about the astrology and the Kabbalah. There's also, I haven't done this yet, this personal card portraits. So in the world of this deck, we all possess every element represented by the cards. Create a personal vampire name, a dynasty card, a vampire clan. Like, I've not done any of this, but it looks like a very cool activity to get like really, really connected with the deck and really feel like in the world of the deck. So I might do that at some point because it just looks fun. The cards themselves, pages of information. So the alchemy, keywords, and then a message. And then there's also, and I think is this for all the cards or just the majors? No, it's for all of them. We've got this analysis and symbolism. You totally could just read this as the card meaning and it would be like more of a traditional kind of guidebook. Like we've got key, this is the correspondences up here with like the astrology and the Kabbalah and the tree of life. The essence is like keywords and key phrases, which are pretty standard for the hermit. We've got introspection and solitude, being a lone wolf, inner clarity, self-discipline, retreat and recuperation. and then the message is like the divinatory meaning of what the hermit means in a more general way. And so that's like your traditional guidebook, right? But then the analysis and symbolism is the world of the tarot vampires. Vampires are often portrayed as outsiders, what the hermit teaches us, the myths of the vampires, the symbolism, more of the astrological stuff, like here, and the hermit obviously ruled by Mercury, and Virgo is the zodiac that the hermit represents, and then some shadow meaning as well. And then it is the same for the minor arcana, it's just slightly shorter entries, but we've still got keywords and key phrases, the message, and then the analysis and the symbolism. It talks about what's going on in the cards, which, you know, was the thing I said at the start of this very long video, that I want the guidebook to reference the artwork it's supposed to be guiding you through, because if it's generic, then honestly, what's the point? So I think this is such a cool guidebook. I know I'm far from the first person to say it. I think if the kind of themes of this deck appeal to you, get it, because it's going out of print. Even if you don't like the artwork, I think the book is really a wealth of information. I really want to dive into this again and deeper. I really am feeling the itch to learn Thoth, and I think once I've done some Thoth study, bringing this in with all of the correspondences in the deck, I think that will really add to my understanding of this. But anyhow, we're not even done. I still have honourable mentions, but that is the last deck that I had to discuss, which has a really good guidebook that comes with the deck. I've got a couple that have guidebooks you can buy separately that I'm very briefly going to talk about. But yeah, Phantasmagoria is the book for the Tarot Vampires. It's a great deck. It's a great guidebook. Truly one of the best mass market, get the guidebook with the deck purchases you can make. And like I say, going out of print, run, don't walk if you want it. Okay, very quickly, I've got 2 honourable mentions, and I will try and keep this quick. First of all, the Voyager Tarot. I think this book, The Way of the Great Oracle, is it out of print, or was it just really hard for me to get in the UK? I don't remember, but I think if you can get this, it's well worth it. I will also say, I think the guidebook that comes with the edition that I've got is pretty solid in and of itself, but this is the Voyager Tarot. We all know and love it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't, but we definitely all know it, even if we don't all love it. It was one of, if not the first collage tarot decks. This one also is kind of its own system. It is tarot, but it was intended and designed to be kind of like an evolution of tarot, I guess. And that is where this book really comes into its own. Again, you can see it's huge. It's a huge book. It's full of text. It's not full of images. It's actually full of information. This is another one where I spent a month working. I say I spent a month working with this deck. I spent a month pulling a card a day and reading the guidebook entry, which I always try and be quite clear is not a deck study, in my opinion. It's a way of getting to know a deck and a guidebook. It's not a dedicated study, but this is one I do want to do a dedicated study of. All this front matter, it's got the different oracles is what he's called them. But so we've got astrology, alchemy, I Ching, geomancy, like different, I guess, divinatory methods, crystals, shamanism, like it goes on. And then in the card entries, the oracular universe, it references these in the card entries. So this, the hermit card, the astrology, the alchemy, the time, the geomancy, like how it all relates together. So it is a very cool, another one that is very like cross-referencey and very like getting into different associations and how they connect to different cards and how you can connect different systems to the tarot, which I think is so cool. It's the kind of thing I talk about all the time. And then it also does include meanings of the cards. So X, 10, fortune. Fortune represents abundance on all levels of being. It's an interpretation of the card. It's a divinatory meaning. And then we've got these fortune qualities, like mental, emotional, physical, spiritual wisdom. And then fortune, oracular, universe, and all of these associations. In the majors, there is also this consulting the oracle section, which is, I guess, like messages and themes of the deck, I suppose is what I'd call it. So the fortune card, fortune telling, be opportunistic, emphasize the inner self. For strength, it gives us affirm your individuality. They're kind of, I guess, yeah, themes or messages of the major cards. It doesn't do that for the minors. We've just got the interpretation, the qualities, and the oracular universe. And so it goes. But this is an incredibly, it's one of those books, kind of like the Tarot of Vampires. It's one of those decks and books where you can really tell that there was so much thought and intention, and that the creator had a concept for a 78 card deck and a concept to connect different systems, and then created that. It wasn't, I want to create a tarot deck, let me make 78 pieces of art, or like I have half a concept. Like, this was a fully fledged concept. This was multiple concepts, let's be honest. Like, this is a whole system based off the tarot. And I know there are several people who wouldn't actually call this a tarot deck because it does deviate. I don't know, discuss in the comments. It's just extremely cool. It's so in depth. I had to mention it, even though you do have to buy this book separately. I think it's a little bit tricky to get hold of. I don't know, there's an ebook edition. I'm unsure, but I had to mention it because it's so cool, and I always want to see more decks and books like this where the creator created a system. They didn't just make 78 pretty pictures and then come up with some keywords for it. Like, this is all very high concept. It's very cool. All right, and then my second honorable mention is the Eldritch Overload, which is honestly looks a little bit sad in comparison to the Voyager and the Tarot of Vampires, because they're two of the coolest guidebooks that I own. But this, you can buy the deck, and it comes with a little white book, which I truly don't think I've ever looked at, but it's, you know, upright and reverse meanings and keywords. This is its own world. It's this sci-fi dystopian. I talk about this all the time. It's shiny, it's colorful, it's cyberpunk dystopia vibes. And then you can buy this Eldritch Overload Codex separately, which only about half of this is actually a guidebook, because the second half is this D&D 5e compatible module. You can like run a campaign in this world, which I think is so cool. I haven't done it yet. We're working on that. But anyway, the guidebook portion, this is kind of like a little white book plus. And I just wanted to give it a mention because I think this is really good. We've got the description, which references the imagery and also the world that this is in. This is very much set in, there's a lot of world building, as there would have to be for a D&D module. But like here, the Four of Wands, it talks about what's happening in the world in this. We've got harvest raves that are not officially endorsed by the city, how this kind of comes about in the world of the Eldritch Overload Tarot. And then we've got upright and reverse meanings with keywords. And then this is what I really like about this guidebook, is these questions, applications of the card maybe. Relationships with others can offer stability and support, but they don't grow freely. You must cultivate them with care and attention. Your next social event is a great opportunity to foster new connections or nurture the ones already in your garden. So it's a little bit similar to the Goddess of Love and the Herb Crafters. It's got these kind of like applications of the card. I think some of them are a bit more like journal questiony, like here, who has empowered you to be where you are now, with the Five of Wands. And some of them are kind of an example of how this card can manifest. Again, it's that kind of thing that makes me think a little bit deeper about the card. It's a way of contextualizing the card that doesn't feel too literal to me. I've talked about this before. If I take the artwork too literally, I can't read it. I can't read with that deck. But when it comes to guidebook entries, I can take it or leave it, and I don't have that same problem. So yeah, there is nothing more embarrassing than making a major blunder in front of others for the Five of Cups. And that's not necessarily what I would think about with the Five of Cups. But I can just like dismiss that from my brain when I'm doing the interpretation and doing my reading. I hope that makes sense. I don't know. Again, everything's very personal. Your mileage may vary, but I had to give this a shout out because I think it's really cool. I really like the world building. Again, there's a lot of thought and intention that's gone behind this deck. I don't think just from looking at it, it's easy to tell whether it was a D&D module that then they decided to create a deck for, or if they wanted to create the deck and then made a D&D module out of it. Like, it doesn't feel like an afterthought to me. I hope that makes sense. So I had to give it a shout. This one's indie. I think it's still available, but this one's indie, so it's expensive if you want to get the deck and the book, which is why it's an honorable mention and not like officially listed in my video. But I do think it's very, very cool. All right, finally, really quickly, hopefully, I'm gonna just show off yes, I have 3 decks that I think have really cool guidebooks, but I have not yet worked with them, so I could not begin to tell you. The first of those is the Tower of the Cat People, which I spoke about in my mid-year tarot tag as a deck I want to work with this year, because it's this whole world building again. Like, the reason I love the Eldritch Overload so much is because it's got all this world building. The art, first of all, the artwork, gorgeous, beautiful, stunning. And then in the guidebook, we've got like the ecology of the cat people, the languages, the religion, the government. It's fully sci-fi world. The cat people believe that the elements of nature contain spirits or essences for the religion. Art and recreation, music, dancing, and sports play a great part in the lives of the cat people. I think this is so cool. Like, I'm such a nerd for this kind of stuff. Like, I love sci-fi, I love D&D. Therefore, I think it's pretty obvious that I would love this. Like, give me world building. I just think it's so cool. And I love when creators are able to like get nerdy like this and be like, yeah, I've not just created 78 pieces of artwork, I've created this whole world, I've created this whole society, and I'm going to write it down for you. Love it. When it comes to the actual cards, there is varying amounts of information. We've got some keyword, upright and reverse meanings, and then this kind of context of the world. So here we're talking about the outer regions, an experienced traveling businesswoman returning from her journey, which is interesting for the Six of Swords. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this, to seeing how the creator puts the tarot cards in this context of the world for cat people. Okay, next up, we've got the Wildwood Tarot, which was sent to me by the lovely Imogen over at Sapling Tarot. And I have not touched this yet. It's still very much in order. I feel like I don't need to show this one off. Everybody and their kitchen sink has seen this deck, but the guidebook looks really cool. The guidebook does look very in-depth, and it has this whole kind of ethos around it. People are really into this deck, and I feel like there must be a reason. It's also got a fair amount of this like front matter of how to use the deck or what the deck is supposed to symbolize. Like I say, I've not read it yet, but this is very, very pagan-y, very druid-y, not as much as the Druidcraft Tarot, but it's still got that kind of romanticizing, pagan-y, ancient British landscape thing, which I have my reservations about, but I will read it and I will see how I feel. The guidebook's really good. I'm excited to get into it, even if I was initially and still am quite skeptical of how this deck is doing its thing. Finally, the Shadowscapes, which I did an unboxing on this channel a million years ago in like March, maybe April, who knows. Have I picked it up? No. In my defense, I moved. I am excited to get into this guidebook purely because it is written by Barbara Moore, who is like a big tarot name, and I have a book by her. My Tarot Spreads book is written by Barbara Moore, and I love it. And you know, she's Barbara Moore, so I'm excited to read a guidebook that she's written, because I don't have any decks aside from this with books written by Barbara Moore. I know she's done lots, and I think she's done lots for Llewellyn in this like big box situation, but I'm looking forward to getting into it and seeing what she has to say. This is also an extremely beautiful deck. The Shadowscapes Tarot is the third deck that I have that I'm excited to get into the guidebook about, and is the final deck I have to talk about in this extremely long video. Alright, that is everything. That is everything I had to say. That is all of the decks I had to show off. I think I talked about 15 decks in total. So I hope you found this valuable and interesting. I think a lot of these you could take as a pretty solid recommendation for like, if you're a beginner tarot reader, or just if you want a deck to study, or just if you like a good guidebook, or you're a fellow, if you're a tarot nerd, which I say with the utmost fondness, because me too, these are all good decks and good books to go with them to like really get into it. So I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much for sticking with me. If you've made it to the end of this probably very long video, I really hope you've enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your favorite guidebooks are, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching. Give me a like if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.